नमस्कार। आदरणीय अध्यक्ष महोदया, माननीय कुलपति प्रोफेसर नंदिनी साहू मैम, हमारे विशिष्ट वक्तागण प्रोफेसर मृदुला रश्मि किंडो मैम तथा डॉक्टर सुनीता मुर्मू मैम, सम्मानित प्राध्यापकगण, प्रिय विद्यार्थियों एवं सभी प्रतिभागियों, आप सभी का हिंदी विश्वविद्यालय पश्चिम बंगाल द्वारा आयोजित तुलनात्मक विश्व साहित्य विषय के इस महत्वपूर्ण वेबिनार में हार्दिक अभिनंदन एवं स्वागत है। आज का ये वेबिनार तुलनात्मक विश्व साहित्य के अध्ययन की नवीन दिशाओं, उसकी बहुआयामी संभावनाओं तथा वैश्विक साहित्यिक विमर्श के विविध आयामों को समझने का एक उत्कृष्ट अवसर है। अब मुझे अत्यंत हर्ष एवं गौरव के साथ हमारी अध्यक्ष महोदया, हिंदी विश्वविद्यालय पश्चिम बंगाल की माननीय कुलपति प्रोफेसर नंदिनी साहू मैम का संक्षिप्त परिचय प्रस्तुत करते हुए स्वागत करना चाहूंगी। प्रोफेसर नंदिनी साहू मैम एक प्रतिष्ठित शिक्षाविद, सुप्रसिद्ध कवयित्री, सृजनात्मक लेखिका, आलोचक, लोक साहित्य की विदुषी तथा भारतीय अंग्रेजी साहित्य की एक विशिष्ट एवं सशक्त हस्ताक्षर है। आप इग्नू नई दिल्ली में विदेशी भाषा संकाय की पूर्व निदेशिका रह चुकी हैं। आपकी लगभग 23 से अधिक मौलिक एवं संपादित पुस्तकें प्रकाशित हो चुकी हैं। स्नातक एवं स्नातकोत्तर के स्तर पर स्वर्ण पदक प्राप्त करने के साथ साथ अंग्रेजी अध्ययन में उत्कृष्ट योगदान के लिए आपको भारत के माननीय उपराष्ट्रपति द्वारा भी स्वर्ण पदक से सम्मानित किया गया है। इसके साथ साथ माइकल मधुसूदन अकेडमी अवार्ड, लाइफ टाइम अचीवमेंट पुरस्कार, टैगोर सम्मान और ऑनररी फेलोशिप तथा एम्बेसडर ऑफ अटर्निटी अवार्ड जैसे अनेक प्रतिष्ठित सम्मान आपकी विशिष्ट उपलब्धियों के प्रमाण हैं। नव साहित्य अध्ययन, आलोचनात्मक सिद्धांत, लोक साहित्य एवं संस्कृति अध्ययन, भारतीय ज्ञान परंपरा तथा तुलनात्मक विश्व साहित्य आपके प्रमुख शोध क्षेत्र हैं। अब मैं आदरपूर्वक माननीय कुलपति एवं हमारी अध्यक्ष महोदया प्रोफेसर नंदिनी साहू मैडम से विनम्र निवेदन करती हूँ कि वे अपने उद्घाटन उद्बोधन द्वारा इस कार्यक्रम का शुभारंभ करें। मैडम, आपका हार्दिक स्वागत है।
सभी को नमस्कार। Thank you so much, Dr. Paramita, for this generous introduction. I welcome the two senior professors, Professor Sunita Murmu and Professor Mridula Rashmi Kindo, to be a part of this very important lecture series offered from Hindi University, West Bengal. The umbrella term being Comparative World Literatures. We have invited the best brains in the country and otherwise to be a part of this important lecture series and share their research with us in terms of lectures and syllabus design and translation for Hindi University West Bengal. For your record, madam, I would like to inform both of you that probably both of you are 100 and 101 speakers. That's what I understand. We already have almost 50 lectures, and in every lecture we take 2, sometimes even we have taken 3. So if I'm not wrong, you must be the 100th speaker for the series, and we are going to use your lectures. The copyright will be definitely with Hindi University West Bengal. It will be a part of our YouTube series on CWL, Comparative World Literatures. And I have a very happy news to share with you. Only yesterday I received approval for 5 new disciplines in Hindi University. We already have 4. We have history, political science, Hindi, and translation studies, and the 4 disciplines are going successfully. Admissions are always very overwhelming in Hindi University, and we are a university catering to multiple languages. We follow the 3 language policy, but at the same time we are planning to design and develop MA programs on the 24 languages approved by the Constitution of India and on multiple folk languages and tribal languages in very near future. That is where we will need the help and support of experts like you. And this lecture series that we initiated in 2025 has received overwhelming response from researchers, speakers, participants, and students. various universities are using our lectures as a part of their classroom teaching, with, of course, the copyright being with us. And we will also use your videos as a part of our MOOCs. We are planning to offer MOOCs in very near future on comparative world literatures, one course, and the other will be the translation studies. We are planning to use your lectures there as well. So your lectures will be useful for our students and faculty in multiple ways. So I'm extremely grateful to both of you for having accepted our invitation and agreeing to share your research with Hindi University West Bengal. We welcome you to be a part of our family and our journey. Now, coming to our relationship, at least my relationship with the two speakers today, I have a very long and deep association with Professor Mridula Rashmi Kindo. We worked together for nothing less than 20 long years. We learned from our mistakes, we learned from the experiences of each other. We shared our syllabus design, we guided PhD scholars together. Indeed, we shared lives together in IGNOU for a long period of 20 years, and with deep sense of solidarity and sisterhood with Professor Mridula Rashmi Kindo, I invite her to be a part of Hindi University as well, and to contribute to Hindi University the way she has contributed to my life in IGNOU. When I was new in IGNOU, she was already there for, I think, 6-7 years, and for every small thing I used to rush to her room and discuss these issues regarding syllabus design or regarding proposing new courses. So that is where she was always instrumental in sharing her experience with me. And today I am so grateful that she is here with Hindi University as well. And now, coming to Professor Sunita Murmu, I met her for the first time this year. But before that, I have virtually met her several times on various platforms. And I know that she is doing some community friendly and student friendly work. When I went to her university, I saw the way she carries herself as a senior professor, guiding her students, her faculty, and taking care of the research and teaching of the department as the head of the department. And she held a seminar, she conducted a seminar, important international seminar, where I was a guest, and I saw the meaningful academic inputs and the hard work she had taken together before the seminar, and then after the seminar, the kind of publications, everything that she came up with. I have deep appreciation and a lot of respect for Professor Sunita Murmu, a very rare kind of a scholar and a wonderful human being who takes care of the community, not just herself. So, Professor Sunita Murmu, I welcome you to be a part of Hindi University lecture series and to be a part of our family, which we have been, trying to put together so many new courses, so many new lectures. We are an infant university. We are very, very new. We are not like IGNOU, or we're not like your university. So my IGNOU experiences are useful for me here. I was just telling Professor Mridula that I'm using all my IGNOU experiences here, so that we are designing so many courses. And today, the two lectures that are coming up, one is reading post-colonial literatures within comparative framework, and the other one by Professor Mridula Rashmi Kindo, oral traditions, Aboriginal Australians and the tribes of India. Of course, I do not expect anything less than this from the two of you. Professor Mridula Rashmi Kindo has been designing courses on writings from the margin, those kind of important courses for IGNOU. So I'm sure that her research will be extremely useful for us. And then reading post-colonial literatures within a comparative framework, yes, this lecture will be very useful to be a part of the course one or the block one of our comparative world literatures MA course, which is upcoming. And I'm going to take down notes when both of you speak, and then at the end of your lecture, if I have any questions or anything, I'll again get back to you. Now I leave it to Dr. Paramita to welcome both of you formally and introduce your important work to our audiences and our scholars and students. Thank you for having joined us.
थैंक यू मैम। अब मैं आज की प्रथम विशिष्ट वक्ता प्रोफेसर मृदुला रश्मि किंडो मैडम का स्वागत करते हुए उनका संक्षिप्त परिचय प्रस्तुत करना चाहूंगी। प्रोफेसर मृदुला रश्मि किंडो इग्नू नई दिल्ली के स्कूल ऑफ ह्यूमैनिटीज में प्रोफेसर, विदुषी, अनुवादक एवं प्रतिष्ठित शोधकर्ता हैं। आपने जवाहरलाल नेहरू विश्वविद्यालय से एमफिल के दौरान तुर्क भाषा की कहानियों का अंग्रेजी में अनुवाद किया तथा दक्षिण अफ्रीकी साहित्यकार नदीन गोडीमर के साहित्य पर पीएचडी शोध कार्य संपन्न किया। दक्षिण अफ्रीकी साहित्य, न्यू लिटरेचर्स इन इंग्लिश, लिटरेचर्स फ्रॉम द मार्जिन्स तथा ट्राइबल लिटरेचर आपके प्रमुख विशेषज्ञता के क्षेत्र हैं। आपने इग्नू के स्नातक एवं स्नातकोत्तर कार्यक्रमों के लिए अनेक पाठ्यक्रम विकसित किए हैं तथा वर्तमान में 4 वर्षीय स्नातक कार्यक्रम एवं पीएचडी कार्यक्रम की समन्वयिका भी हैं। आपके अनेक शोध पत्र एवं पुस्तकें प्रकाशित हो चुके हैं तथा आपने राष्ट्रीय एवं अंतर्राष्ट्रीय संगोष्ठियों में शोध पत्र प्रस्तुत करने के साथ अनेक सत्रों की अध्यक्षता भी की है। मैडम, आपका हिंदी विश्वविद्यालय पश्चिम बंगाल के इस वेबिनार में हार्दिक स्वागत है। मैं सादर अनुरोध करती हूँ कि आप अपना व्याख्यान प्रस्तुत करें।
Thank you, Dr. Paramita. And I would like to first thank Professor, Honorable Vice-Chancellor of Hindi University, Professor Nandini Sahu, she has given me the opportunity to come and speak here. And it's my, fortune that I'm the 100 or the 101 of those speakers. So thank you for involving me and thank you for the kind introduction which you have given me. And of course, we have known each other for more than a decade. And it was nice working with you. And I hope that, from here, after this vice-chancellorship, you get more vice-chancellorships so that you don't need to come back to IGNOU. And that is my wish. So I would also like to, welcome the students and the faculty who are here, and then I'll begin my lecture. I'll be talking about Aboriginal Australians and tribes of India, their oral traditions. Because a lot of we know about Aboriginal writers who have written about the written literature, but not much has been said about their oral literature or their way of life or their worldview. And I'll also be talking about the belief systems of the tribals of India and their worldview. So we know that tribals have always they have been considered as savage, uncultured, lacking sophistication, raw people, and mostly the colonizers, they had this view about them, whether it was Aboriginal Australians or the tribals or the Adivasis of India. And so we should read more about them and try to gain more information about them and know about their rich culture, because both the Aboriginal Australians and the tribals of India, they have a very rich culture, and they know that they have to save their ecology, and they are aware. Both of them are very aware of the ecology, the biodiversity in both the countries. So I'll start with the tribes of India. A little about a brief introduction. That there are around 700 tribal communities in the country, because these tribals, there are tribes and then there are sub-tribes as well. Like there's the Gond tribe, and the sub-tribe is the the Bayaga tribe. So there are many such tribes which have sub-tribes, and they are around 700 in our country. They make about 8.6% of India's population, and they have been dwelling in India from around before 12th century and living for more than 25,000 years. So they are, in fact, the very old dwellers in India. So scholars believe that these ancestors migrated to India from regions like Africa, Australia, and central India thousands of years ago. And most of the tribal people live in the central, western, and northeastern parts of India. And they are generally grouped into 4 major language and ethnic families. So there's one group called Astro-Asiatic, and the Santals and the Munda tribes, they belong to this group. Then there's another group called Negrito, and we find that the Jarawas and the Sentinelese tribes of Andaman, Nicobar Islands, they belong to this category. Then the Nagas and Lepchas belong to the Mongoloid category. And the Toda and Chenchu tribes are of the Dravidian category. Then they speak languages from the Austroasiatic, Tibeto-Burman, and the Dravidian language families. The G.N. Devi, who is the critic active, he's also a cultural activist and he's worked a lot with the tribals. He talks about them as being closely related to nature, and they're closely connected to the trees, the birds, and the stars. They see these elements as their living companions, and they do not live isolated lives. They are linked to a living chain, so nobody feels lonely. They live in a community setup, and they're for them, God, nature, and community cannot be separated. So these are some of these characteristics of the tribals, which about which G. N. Devi tells us or informs us. Then about the Aboriginals, these Aboriginals and Torres Strait Islanders people, they are also called the First Nations people. Now, the first people of Australia. So the Australian Aboriginal history goes back to at least 65,000 years. It is the oldest continuous culture in the world. Aboriginal people, they belong to hundreds of different language and cultural groups. They lived in many different environments across Australia. They cared for the land and used the sustainable practices. In 1788, the British colonization began, and they led to the loss of land, and a large decline of the tribal population was because of them. In 1788, when the Europeans and British came to Australia, they found that the Australians were these Aboriginals were occupying the land. And they spoke around 300 to 500 different languages, and they were around 10 lakhs people, Aboriginals, before the Europeans came. And in the 20th century, they were reduced to 70,000. And this was because they faced violence in the hands of these Europeans. There were disease which was brought by these Europeans. And that's how they were slowly disappearing. And now the population is reduced to around 60,000. And these Aboriginals, they have actually undergone a lot of violence and exploitation from these colonizers. They were chased to barren lands and where nothing grew. They were deprived of shelter and sufficient food. The children were separated from them, their families, and forced to work in the farmland as laborers. The girls were forced to do domestic work. And these went on for many decades. And in 2008, Prime Minister Kevin Rudd, he asked for forgiveness for the past officially from the generation that was separated from their families. Now, these British, when they came, they claimed that the land that is called Terra Nullius, which means nobody's land. So this ignored the fact that the Aboriginal had lived there for 1,000 years. They did not want to. They wanted to claim these lands, which was nobody's land, and the Aboriginals used these lands, and these Aboriginals had to continue to fight for their rights and protect their culture, and there are they fought for their rights, and they got the right to vote in 1967, and they also were part of the national census. Then they in 1992, the Terra Nullius was rejected, and it recognized that Aboriginal land and Torres Strait Islander people have traditional land right known as the native title. Today, the Aboriginal communities are still fighting for greater recognition and their rights. Similarly, when we come to India, we find that in the Jharkhand area and what was Bihar and Bihar, which was Jharkhand and Bihar was separated, and Jharkhand was taken out of Bihar. So at that time, the Sardar movement was had started by the Munda and the Urao tribes, and they also fought for the land that was taken by the outsiders whom they called Dipus. Then there was another, then it was around 1858 to 1895. Then there was another movement, the Kherwar movement, which was also led by the Santhal tribes in the Santhal Pargana area, which is also during almost the same period, 1868 to 1870. And they also demanded lower land rates. So these people, we see the Aboriginals and the tribals of India, they were all fighting for their land. Land is their identity. The Mundas, Uraus, and the Santhals, they were all fighting for for the land. And we also have, another movement called the Munda Rebellion or the Ulgulan movement, which was started by Birsa Munda. And it also they also struggled for tribal communities' rights to own and cultivate their ancestral lands, and they wanted to protect their customs, their traditions, and the social values. Then in we have Santhal rebellion, and it was fought by two brothers, Sidhu Murmu and Kanhu Murmu, and they started this movement in 1855, and around 10,000 Santhals joined the movement. So we see that they are also fighting for their rights, and they also got the Forest Right Act, which was given to them to uh, allow them to own and use forest land for living and farming. Then they were also given the fifth and the sixth schedule, which helps to prevent the loss of the tribal land and to for greater self-governance. Then so we see that uh, they have also been given rights by the government now that they had several movements. Talking about the art, we see that the Australia and all these their history, all these comes out of their folklore. They don't have any written history, whether it's Aboriginals or the tribals or Adivasis. So the Australian landscape, including deserts, they include deserts, forest, and coastline, which is very different from the forests and the greenery of India. And they play a very important role in Aboriginal art. Their art represents the spiritual connection to nature and the stories that ancestors have passed down through many generations. Then these they provide a visual way to share these stories. Every line, dot, and symbol in the artwork has meaning. The art tells stories about the dream time, and the dream time is their, it was a repository of stories, their ancestral beings, and the natural world. Through their art, Aboriginal people and traditions alike. They honor their past, and they have also a lot of other uh, art forms. They have uh, two art forms, which is one is the X-ray art and one is the rock art. X-ray art is they draw an animal and they also draw its skeletons, through as if it is, you can see through as if it's an X-ray. So they Aboriginal communities value traditional healing practices that support overall health and well-being. These practices are connected to spirituality and are often shown in their art. Coming to the tribals of India, we have several. We have art forms of different tribes, like the Sohrai painting, which is done by women in the Central India. In Central India, they decorate walls with beautiful paintings of animals. Then we have the Khewar painting, which is which are made like murals, and they have intricate symbolic fertility and nature motifs. So both these Sohrai and Khewar paintings have been granted geographical indication tag, giving them the unique these tribal art forms national and international recognition. Then we have other paintings from like Worli paintings, Gond art, Sora art, Pithora paintings. So these are of different of tribe. These arts are again done by different tribals of different areas. Then tattooing also is also an art which is practiced by the Baigas, the Uraus, the Mundas. This kind of art. This is actually, they have these tattooing is, or which is called Godna. It is done on the forehead. these girls receive their first tattoo on their forehead just before reaching puberty. Then it is also done at different places of their parts of their body in various stages of their lives. One of the scholars, Dr. Chaurasia, he says that the Baigas believe that we are both naked and will leave this world naked. Godana or tattoos are our true adornments, and that the only possessions we carry with us after death when we go to God. If we do not go to God wearing these tattoos, we believe that God will punish us. And then there is these are the forms of arts of both the tribals. Then they celebrate the both the tribes have they celebrate major festivals like in India they celebrate the Phagwa, Sarhul, Karam, Sohrai. In the northeast they celebrate the Maushu Mong, which is celebrated by the Ao tribe of Nagaland, or the other festival in Nagaland called the Lui Nai Shi Naini. So these the seed sowing festivals. These are the seed sowing festivals, or then the harvest, which is related to the harvest. These are all related to nature and the divine. And similarly, we have festivals in Australia, and which are celebrated by Aboriginals. That is the Garma festival, Yapun festival, Barwanga festival. So these are all related to nature as well. Then there are these both the tribes as well as the Aboriginals. They know a lot of uh, the plants which are medicinal and which are found in their uh, areas. Uh, in Australia, it is called country, which is the landscape with lands, waters, and skies. And here, a lot of medicinal plants are found. And Aboriginal healers have prepared remedies by crushing, by soaking, and they heat these plants and leaves and barks and roots, and they are used as antiseptic and inflammatory and respiratory. They have all these properties, and they have plants like tea tree, eucalyptus, emu bush, and lemon myrtle, which are used for this purpose. Then and here in India also we have a lot of these plants, and the Birhot tribe has a fruit called bhelva, from where they take out bhelva oil, or sinjo fruit, which is used to make the bamboo baskets waterproof. Then you have the mahua fruit or seeds, which is also eaten as seed. They make beer out of it, or and also they is eaten as food. Coming to the Aboriginals, they use farming, which is ecological. The fire stick farming, which is also called cool burning, is a traditional way of controlling fire to manage the land. They use this for many reasons. It helps make hunting easier. It controls weeds. It reduces the risk of large bushfires. It supports the growth of different plants and animals and increases biodiversity. And in India, also we have these kinds of uh, farming, which helps in sustainability, and they practice. They harvest only when it is required and avoid unnecessary exploitation of forests and rivers and wildlife. Many communities deliberately limit their visit to the forest area so that they minimize the disturbance of the ecosystem. So, traditional ecology knowledge also shapes their tribal agriculture practices for the tribes of Nagaland. And there's a tribe called belonging to the Kikruma village, and they use a system called the Zabo system of cultivation, which is impounding water. The rainwater flowing from the hilltops is collected in ponds and reservoirs, and they are stored during the dry season for their use. The tribal worldview is deeply rooted in spirituality. So there are with natural elements often regarded as sacred. In India, they revere the trees, the rivers, the mountains, and even climatic forces are believed to possess divine power or spiritual presence. The many tribals worship nature, and they honor the spirits of the ancestors, believing that the spiritual forces safeguard their well-being. And such beliefs strengthen environmental conservation by fostering respect to the natural world. Then I'll skip some parts because then there'll be I'll exceed the time. So we talked about ecological, both in fact the Aboriginals and the tribals of India, they have ecological agriculture. They practice water management. They through the rituals and conservations, they try to hunt only during certain season. In India, they have sacred groves called they do not visit these groves frequently because they consider it as sacred. They have a lot of medicinal plants growing there. They have endangered plants there growing there, and they do not want to disturb that area. So we find that they have a lot of geological awareness. If you remember in 2004 when the tsunami had come, and in the Andaman Nicobar Islands, these Onge, Jarawa, and the Sentinelese tribes, uh, uh, they had to face the tsunami. They had known about this, this calamity from beforehand, and they got through it because they know their folklore. They when they saw that the water was receding and the earth was shaking, and they saw very unusual behavioral patterns of birds and marine life, then they started moving towards the higher areas, and that is how it saved them. Then coming to the Aboriginal culture, which is based on dreaming, which is called dream time. And it includes spiritual beliefs, creation stories, and laws. And these teachings explain the connection between people, animals, and land. Aboriginal belief systems, and we know about the Aboriginal belief systems through these dreamings. And according to dreamings, the Aboriginal belief systems are not based on animism. It is natural features are regarded as having significance because of their connection to ancestral beings and events from the creation period. They have a particular rock which is believed to possess a soul in itself, but may be understood as having been created or representing an ancestral being. Many Aboriginal traditions also hold that the spirits of the humans, animals, and plants are interconnected through the cycles of reincarnation, reflecting the time in the creation period. Then we'll move to the stories of the dreaming. There's totem system. There are totem systems in Aboriginal, which Aboriginals practice. This is they have clans which are represented by a totem, and totems are the plants or animals which they have it in their area. So these totems connect individuals to the natural world, including the land, waterways, landscapes, plants, and animals. So these about these totems also we come to know from their creation story. In India as well, they have totems. Here, if we look at the Muria tribes, you'll find that the Dandai fish is their totem, and they do not kill the fish, and they revere the fish. In the Ural tribes, the Nag clan, they revere the cobra as the totem, while the Kachap clan regards the tortoise as their sacred emblem. So we have a lot of similarities when we talk about the rituals, their belief systems. Coming to the creation story, I'll read out a creation story, and then we'll see how it is similar to that of the tribes of India. So they have this creation story. This is called the rainbow serpent. The rainbow serpent is an ancestral creation being that appears in many First Nation dreaming stories. he teaches moral and spiritual laws. These stories describe how the rainbow serpent created various features of the Australian landscape, waterways, and billabongs, which are ponds. The rainbow serpent created the trees and the animals as well. There are three locations where the Australians believe, or the Aboriginals believe, that now uh, is the spirit, or the spiritual being is resting right now. So the creation story of the rainbow serpent is, I'll be reading the story. It In the dream time, the time of creation, the world was first dry and lifeless. From deep beneath the earth, the rainbow serpent awakened and emerged into the surface. As she journeyed across the empty landscape, her enormous body shaped the land, carving deep gorges, valleys, and winding waterbeds. After a long journey, the rain serpent grew very weary and rested. When she awoke, she called to the frogs whose bellies were swollen with water. She gently tickled them, and they laughed and released the water they had been holding. The water flowed into the valleys and channels the serpent had formed, creating rivers and lakes. As the land filled with water, grasses, trees, and countless other living creatures sprang to life and flourished. With water, grass and trees began to grow, which woke all the animals who had followed the rainbow serpent across the land. They were happy on earth, and each lived and gathered food with their own tribe. Some animals lived in rocks, some on vast plains, and others in trees and in the sky. The rainbow serpent made laws that they were all to obey, but some began to make trouble and argue. The rainbow serpent said, "Those who keep my laws will be rewarded. I will give them human form. Those who break my laws will be punished and turned to stone and will never to walk the earth again. Those who broke the law became stones and were turned into mountains and hills, and those who were obedient were turned into human form and were each given their own totem of the animal, birds, or reptiles from whom they began. These tribes knew themselves by their totems, uh, such as kangaroos, emu, carpet snake, and many, many more. So no one would starve. The rain serpent ruled that no man should eat of his totem, but only of other totems. This was their, so that there's food for everyone. The tribals lived together on the land given to them by the rainbow serpent, or the mother of life, and knew the land would always be theirs, and no one should ever take them home. So there are different versions of these of this story, uh, and they believe that, and the Kakadu people of the Northern Territory believe that the rainbow serpent still rests in the Kakadu National Park and should not be disturbed. Different First Nation language groups have different names for the rainbow serpent. The story, the rainbow serpent has different versions due to cultural roots. The importance of this story is that these Aboriginal people, they continue with the serpent rainbow serpent tradition by painting this figure on, even on the bark today, and this is one of the world's oldest continuing stories and beliefs. Then the other story is of the seven sisters, and this is also a creation story according to them. And they were they were ancestral beings from the sky who came down to earth. And a group of men saw women for the first time and wanted to follow them. The sisters escaped by using their digging sticks to fight the men. So it's a long story, but I'll not read the entire story. So in the end, the seven sisters escaped into the sky, and Yulu, who followed them, and the chase continues today. The seven sisters are seen as the Pleiades star cluster, and the Yulu is seen as the Orion constellation chasing them across the night sky. The story teaches important lessons about surviving on the land, the changing seasons, and the creation. As the sisters escaped, they found parts of the landscape, including water holes and springs. The story also teaches the importance of family and strong relationships. For Aboriginal people, the stars are much more than lights in the sky. They tell stories that teach about history, culture, law, family, and relationship. When Aboriginal artists paint these stories, they help keep their tradition and knowledge alive for future generations. Now, we'll also look at the Santhali story or the ancestor story, which is again a creation story. And so, I'll read the ancestor story. This narrates the Kolyan, the old Kolyan has told it. This narrates the story of how the world was created and how the first humans were born. In the beginning, there was only water and the earth was under the water. Then the supreme god called Thakur Jio began making the creatures of the water, such as the crabs, the alligators, the fish, the prawn, the tortoise, and others. After that, Thakur Jio made two humans, but before he could make them souls, the day horse trampled them to pieces. Then Thakurjio made a pair of geese that flew in the air. When the geese asked for a firm place to alight on, Thakur made land and with the help of the earthworm and the tortoise. The tortoise stood quietly on the water while the earthworm went down to bring up the earth. The earthworm ate the earth, which was passed through his tail onto the tortoise's back. As the earth spread and became firm, Thakurjio planted seeds in it, and so the land was made. The pair of geese then bore two eggs in a nest, and which was hatched and gave birth to two human beings, a boy and a girl. The place where the two humans grew up was called Hiri Pipiri. The man was called Pilku Haram, and the girl or the woman was called the Pilku Buddhi. They were naked, but they felt no shame. One day, the principal deity of the Santhals, who is called Maranburu or Lita, came to them in the guise of grandfather and taught them how to brew liquor. After being drunk, they were amorous and with each other and slept together. Later, the two human beings were ashamed and made coverings for their bodies with leaves. When they confessed their sexual act to Maranburu, he just smiled and said, "It does not matter." So the first human couple lived together with 14 children, 7 boys and 7 girls. So the Mircea Eliade, who is a historian, according to his theory, the myth as a sacred history is particularly useful in understanding the significance of this creation myth. Here, a primitive culture uses storytelling as a sacred ritual. In Santhali, the Santhals, usually they consider the ancestor story as a sacred story, and it is narrated by as Karam Binti during the Santhal Karam festivals by the Karam Guru, usually late at night and before a group of people gathered around the Karam tree branch that is planted in the village street. So we see that aboriginal creation stories, they can be narrated by anybody. But here in tribes of India, we see that the creation stories are usually narrated by their spiritual gurus, and which is done during festivals because it is considered sacred. So we see there are a lot of commonalities, and the creation, the basic aim of the creation story is it helps people deal with the mystery or how the universe, the world, the human life began. It also tries to answer important questions like who am I and what is my purpose in life. And these creation stories, mainly in India, they are about the origin of man, about the origin of the animals, and the original creation stories, they talk about the totems, they talk about their worldview, they talk about a whole lot of things. So there are some difference which is there, but the themes more or less are the same. So what we so in the end, I'll conclude that these tribal folklore, actually, whether it's aboriginal folklore or in tribals of India, they refer to a collection of stories, legends, and songs and artistic expressions that are preserved and passed down orally within their indigenous communities. These narratives serve as a form of unwritten history, which carries knowledge, beliefs, and experiences of generations. They provide moral guidance, they explain natural phenomena, and they strengthen the bond within the communities. These stories continue to be shared and protected through generation. The indigenous literature around the world conveys similar themes through varied forms. Thank you.
आपके आपका ये व्याख्यान के बारे में मैं क्या ही कहूँ, क्योंकि ये तुलनात्मक विश्व साहित्य के विविध पक्षों को जिस तरह से हमारे समक्ष प्रस्तुत आपने किया है अपने व्याख्यान के माध्यम से, मैं कहना चाहूंगी कि आपका ये व्याख्यान अत्यंत ही ज्ञानवर्धक, शोधपरक एवं विचार उत्तेजक रहा है। और आपने अपने गहन विश्लेषण के माध्यम से विषय के अनेक महत्वपूर्ण आयामों को अत्यंत ही सहजता और प्रभावपूर्ण ढंग से हमारे समक्ष प्रस्तुत किया है। इसके लिए हम आपके प्रति हार्दिक आभार व्यक्त करते हैं। अब मैं आज की द्वितीय विशिष्ट वक्ता डॉक्टर सुनीता मुर्मू मैम का हार्दिक स्वागत करते हुए उनका संक्षिप्त परिचय प्रस्तुत करना चाहूंगी। प्रोफेसर सुनीता मुर्मू मैम दीनदयाल उपाध्याय गोरखपुर विश्वविद्यालय गोरखपुर के अंग्रेजी विभाग की प्रोफेसर एवं विभागाध्यक्ष हैं। आपने लोरेटो कॉलेज दार्जिलिंग से स्नातक तथा जवाहरलाल नेहरू विश्वविद्यालय नई दिल्ली के सेंटर फॉर इंग्लिश एंड लिंग्विस्टिक्स से अंग्रेजी विषय में एमए एवं एमफिल की उपाधियां प्राप्त की। पोस्ट कॉलोनियल साहित्य, अफ्रीकी साहित्य, साहित्य एवं जेंडर तथा साहित्य एवं पर्यावरण आपके प्रमुख विशेषज्ञता के क्षेत्र हैं। आपने अनेक शोध पत्र एवं पुस्तक अध्याय प्रकाशित भी किए हैं तथा रिप्रेजेंटेशन एंड रेजिस्टेंस, एसेज ऑन पोस्ट कॉलोनियल थिएटर एंड ड्रामा एवं लिटरेचर्स ऑफ साउथ एशिया जैसी महत्वपूर्ण पुस्तकों का सह संपादन भी आपने किया है। लगभग 25 वर्षों के समृद्ध अध्यापन अनुभव के साथ आपने 8 शोधार्थियों का सफलतापूर्वक मार्गदर्शन भी किया है। विश्वविद्यालय में आपने प्लेसमेंट एंड करियर काउंसलिंग सेल की समन्वयिका, महिला छात्रावास की वार्डन तथा मालवीय मिशन टीचर ट्रेनिंग सेंटर की निदेशिका जैसी महत्वपूर्ण प्रशासनिक जिम्मेदारियां भी आपने निभाई। मैडम, आपका हार्दिक स्वागत एवं अभिनंदन। मैं सादर अनुरोध करती हूँ कि आप अपना व्याख्यान प्रस्तुत करें।
बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद डॉक्टर पारुमिता, आपने इतना खूबसूरत हमारा इंट्रोडक्शन कराया। सबसे पहले मैं आई वुड लाइक टू एक्सटेंड माय रिगार्ड्स टू द ऑनरेबल वाइस चांसलर मैम, प्रोफेसर नंदिनी साहू मैम। I hope I'm audible and like it's loud enough. Okay. And it was a pleasure meeting her in person. And as she mentioned, like, of course, I had known about her, had seen the immense contribution she had been making to folklore studies. And it was indeed a pleasure interacting with her when we had her as the guest of honor in the recently concluded seminar that we had in the month of April. So it was really nice, let's say, meeting her and the ideas that she shared with us regarding her future plans. So I think she is indeed a dynamic vice chancellor. I see her making immense contribution in shaping a new university as well as in the field of literature, or her contribution to folklore studies. So thank you, ma'am, first of all, to you for having invited me to be part of this lecture series. And it is indeed an honor to be able to share my views and ideas in the area of, let's say, comparative literature, comparative world literature. And because I come from a background of post-colonial literatures, so I will be bringing in insights from that particular sphere to comparative literature, and will be talking about it, especially in the Indian context, the Indian multilingual and multicultural society that we live in. My warm wishes, or let's say my love to Mridula, Professor Mridula, because I've known her since a very long time in JNU, though we hadn't been interacting for a long time, but it's such a pleasure to meet and talk to her, and it was wonderful listening to her. Because, while we talk about comparative literature, we also talk about including, indigenous literatures. And she brings so much of knowledge about indigenous literature to this platform, which often gets marginalized and or often are ignored whenever we think of, designing a curriculum. So, or let's say it remains in the peripheries. So it's interesting to, to have such literature interact with, whatever the dominant discourses are there within the, in the literary studies. So that is a pleasure listening to her, and of course to all the students and faculty members who've joined this morning in this webinar. So now, first of all, I would like to, let's say, talk about the context in which we are actually talking about, comparative literature, because or comparative world literature, because we know that, ours is a multicultural, multilingual country, and how do we build a comparative literature framework in such a context in a multilingual India? And what post-colonial perspectives we bring to, or from perspectives we look at, let's say, literatures in English, in the Indian languages, and the indigenous literatures. So I would like to focus on this. And so we see, when we talk about, or let's say, because we know that, let's say, when comparative literature emerged somewhere in the 19th century in the West, and when it became somewhere in the 1950s, it became part of the university departments in the US. And we have Gayatri Chakravarti's PVAC talking about its origins, how he moved from area studies to comparative literature. And we have her very strongly arguing for reading literature not just in the English and European languages, but also in the various languages of South Asia. So there we see her, trying to make this effort, which is, again, a part of all post-colonial literary debates. So, so the question is, when we talk about comparative literature, it's not simply just, the question is not merely an academic one. It also involves or concerns issues of language, issues of power, identity, history, translation, culture, and nationhood. So we see there are so many, let's say, issues involved when we go on to discuss, let's say, in talking about a comparative framework, or, how would we discuss, or what would we discuss when we approach a comparativist, let's say, framework. And as we are all aware that post-colonial literatures, the comparative framework is inherent within post-colonial literatures. Sometimes, it's seen as a post-colonial literature, also seen as a subset of, let's say, comparative literature. And many people, let's say, theorists who have, who have studied the area, people like Susan Bassnett, they could see that, how post-colonial studies, they were to, let's say, offer challenges to the earlier traditional approaches that were being followed within, comparative literature, in comparative literature. So one could see that the perspectives that the frameworks that post-colonial literatures brought or challenged the earlier ways in which literary texts, authors, or the way the texts were being read, or how the reader was being constituted. So you see, various disciplines have been considered to have kind of challenged the traditional comparative literature, let's say, approaches. So you have also, apart from post-colonial studies, you have other disciplines like gender studies, you have translation studies, which also brought in, the methodology by which we can go about reconstructing or reframing the comparatist, the framework. So we see India, and the case is very, let's say, important that we, discuss it in the Indian context, because, India, as I mentioned, it is the diversity of languages, the cultures that is there. So, it's a very different case, unlike, let's say, when comparative literature was being taught in the West, where the privilege, obviously, it was basically the English and the other European languages that were privileged, and where literature was being read from, basically literature originating in these languages, in the European, modern European languages that were being explored. Okay, so but the case with India has been different. Okay, because as I said, it's not just money. We look at the even the various civilizations that that has been a home in India. So India is perhaps, let's say, one of the very few countries where there are hundreds of let's say languages coexist with dozens of literary traditions. So considering the diversity of languages and cultures, obviously there are a whole lot of literary traditions. And unlike European nations, where where comparative literature basically developed through comparisons among national literatures, India presents, as I said, India offers a very different model. As I said, a civilization with multiple literary cultures interacting over over millennia. So it's a, let's say, a space where the literatures in the various languages, they have always been in a sort of a dialogue. It has been in a sort of a conversation. They have not been existing in isolation. So so it's a very interesting, let's say, study. So it is not simply, so the challenge therefore is not simply to to compare texts, but to imagine an intellectual, let's say, framework. Because now when we talk about the national education policy, and there's so much of discussion on how do we make our classrooms multilingual, multicultural, and how do we include, let's say, how do we encourage student diversity in the classroom. So and so the reality that we actually live in, let's say, this the diversity of cultures that we actually live in, how does that get transferred or translated into the university curriculum? That is what is very important and challenging before us when we are talking about comparative framework or teaching and learning within such frameworks. So how do we develop? So how do we do, let's say, in a way, a justice to India's multilingual reality without, let's say, reproducing the colonial hierarchies? So that's the challenge that lies before us. So what I basically wish to, put forth before the audience is that, we should not, let's say, the comparative literature in India should not be built around simply around English language or literature in English languages, nor should it be around any single Indian language. Instead, it should emerge through dialogue, translation, multilingualism, and a recognition of the diverse literary traditions, including oral and indigenous cultures, because that is also what is very important, which we cannot let's say, or at least we shouldn't kind of ignore, and that should also be included. Only then would we be talking about real dialogue and an academic, let's say, framework of culture which is inclusive. So apart from, let's say, how the discipline originated, what changes it went through, already we know that Spivak spoke about the death of the discipline. She was basically talking about comparative literature in her work, The Death of a Discipline, and moving on to, let's say, talking about world literature. And what we found that the most, even when the issue of when, let's say, what was being discussed within comparative literature, let's say, in the US, mostly it included themes, myths, genres, philosophy, and of course interdisciplinary approaches. And today, if we look at comparative literature, we see that essentially we have, we study texts across languages, we study texts across cultures, we study texts across various histories. Then we have we study across media, civilizations. So and we do not, because earlier where it was also being studied in terms of influence studies, what were the literary influences on the text. So we do not merely now do not trace the literary influence. And so Indian comparative literature, let's say, we cannot simply imitate European models, because India's multilingualism is again fundamentally different from that in the West. So it's not just between two countries. It's not like as a comparison between the literature of France and that of Germany. We compare between Tamil and let's say Bengali, between Santali and it could be between Malayalam. It could be Khasi oral traditions with English novels, between Dalit, let's say Dalit autobiographies in Marathi and African American narratives. So you see, so when we already have so much of diversity within the country, and when we also read it in the context of, let's say, or with reference to post-colonial literatures, because colonialism was one historical event or episode that, where, let's say, you have so many nations that were impacted due to colonialism. Okay, so, and you have literatures which emerged with the impact of colonialism, which impacted not just the social and economic conditions, but also, so importantly, the language of the various countries that were brought under colonization by the imperial powers. So you see, so that becomes another, let's say, very significant episode, because the event of colonialism impacted literatures in a way that we find very interesting, responses to the English language by the various languages across, the world, the countries wherever they were colonized, the responses to it. We know of literatures emerging in English in those formerly colonized countries. And how far did they not impact the languages that were already there, or what were the responses to colonialism? So it becomes a very interesting area of study. So when we see, when we understand, let's say, comparative literature in India, we also have to, not have to, we do go back or we do look at colonialism. So British colonialism in a way did transform India's, let's say, linguistic landscape. So we know that because English not only became a language of administration, it became a language of higher education, law, bureaucracy, and the entire, that of literary production, especially elite literary production. Of course, we are all aware of Macaulay's Minute on Education, where he famously said, we are all aware of that, of a class of persons, Indian in blood and color, but English in taste, opinions, morals, and intellect. So we see that language in this case, you see how the literature that emerged at this intersection of language, of education, and power was, and how that emerged, and how it also kind of shaped the identity of a nation and as that of a people. So, so language, in that case became an instrument of power. Okay, we could see that English language, because being a language of the imperial power, when it interacted with the literature or whatever social and cultural production that was there, how it kind of impacted that. So language thus became an instrument of power. And post-colonial theorists, all of most of them remind us that, colonialism was never just, so the theorists tell us that it's not just, the impact of colonialism was not simply political, it was certainly linguistic, and control over language meant control over the knowledge that was produced. And we all are aware of the well-known work of Ngugi wa Thiong'o, Decolonizing the Mind, where he talks about how English impacted the cultures of the various countries, especially in terms of, he speaks in terms in the African context, and how he critiques that the imposition of English language, how it impacted the worldviews of the people, their literature, the way people responded to the English language, the different responses also we have to the English language. Even within Africa, we find, not just Africa, even in India, the responses are very different to the English language. Various writers respond in different ways. But what he was trying to emphasize is that the imposition of the language, in a way, controlled also the people's worldviews. It impacted their political choices, meaning what language they would choose to write in. And we know that for Gugi, how he took a radical stand. He started his literary works by writing in the English language, and he gave up, because he did not want to use the language because he felt, because as he says in his essay, it was a kind of a falsification of realities. He had to represent characters what he explained about such writings, that African writings in English, that they kind of falsified the reality, because here they were depicting characters that was speaking in their let's say GQ or Swahili or other African languages, but they were made to speak in the English language in the novels that were being written, or literary works that was being produced in Africa, or let's say that was being whatever was being produced in the African writings in English. So within even Africa, we find the responses of various writers are very different. You have Shoinka, where he tries to infuse a lot of his Yoruba elements into his theater performances, his plays, and basically I would say indigenize, let's say, English language. On the other hand, you have Chinua Achebe, where he in fact rather almost at times almost glorifies in this. I mean, he says you cannot do much about what you already inherited, the English language. But yes, he does kind of read his novels, Things Fall Apart. You see how the way he resists the English language, the resistance can be seen in the English language by Africanizing it, by indigenizing it. So post-colonial literatures, as we see that, as in the writings of, let's say, several post-colonial writers, we find that how they have, all responded to the issue of language. And a very good example we all have is of Raja Rao in India. I mean, the early examples. Of course, there were several other writers who responded in very different ways. But you have Raja Rao, where he talks about, communicating a spirit of one's own, accepting the fact that it does not really kind of is not able to express the Indian sensibility, and how do we communicate in a language that is not one's own. So we see that so all post-colonial let's say writers in some way or the other have responded in different ways to the issue of language. And of course, Gugi does take a very strong stand when it comes to that of the English language. And what we also become aware, that because of the impact of colonialism, English did become associated with prestige, with modernity, with education, with employment. And in the process, we know that, that many indigenous traditions came to be, they were marginalized. Okay. And so you have also a Spivak arguing for, let's say, trying to speak for the subaltern. Okay, so you see, so history is definitely quite becomes very complicated. And even while the Indian writers, they appropriated English, we know that we are all familiar with the work of Bill Ashcroft and Helen Tiffin, and how they talk about abrogation and appropriation of the English language, how several post-colonial writers, how they transformed English. And in the case of India, we see how they transformed English into an Indian language. So Indian English literature now is, again, if we all are aware, it's not simply, British literature which is written in India. It is now, it has already formed a distinct, let's say, it has now a distinct Indian literature, Indian English literature tradition, we could say. Okay, but while we were studying, or while I was studying post-colonial literatures, and let's say if you go through Meenakshi Mukherjee's work, The Perishable Empire, what was very interesting during one of the class discussions, I remember, is that while we were talking about, issues about what concerns, what is of, paramount importance for Indian writers writing in the English languages, and those writers writing in the, let's say, Indian languages. And what emerged in our analysis and study was very interestingly that, issues like the nation, you find that so strongly evident, strong evidence of it in several, most of the Indian writers writing in the English language in the early phase of the emergence of the, when the English writings in English emerged. So you have Raja Rao, who talks about, of course, this was also to do with the spirit of nationalism that imbued the literature of that time, that emerged at that time in several countries, not just India. So while nation does become a concern, writing in 1938, nation does become an an important concern in the novel, where it kind of hints at the rising, not hints at, talks about the rising nationalism, talks about probably independence waiting to happen. Around that time, if you look at Premchand's Godam, written 1936, while it does talk about, there is the context of the British colonial system there, but the concern over there is not so much, or let's say the theme does not so much, talk about, let's say, nation directly. It talks about the exploitation of the poor, how the circumstances that he has to work in, how the oppressive system that he has to labor under, the landlords. So a critique of, again, let's say, the existing power structures there, the power social and economic structures that are powerful and power within the in the Indian context. Okay, so no direct reference as such to colonialism, but yet, so this is where post-colonial studies, it helps us to see that, and where within post-colonial studies we know that when we start discussing issues of power, issues of hierarchies, we are able to relate, let's say, the impact of colonialism on those who were colonized, and we are able to see connections or draw parallels between, let's say, the internal systems of domination. You see, so they may not talk of the same issues, but very interesting. That is, we start seeing how, let's say, power operates, how power impacts those who are, let's say, subjugated and or on the subjects, and that kind of encourages us to explore further as to what power does to those who are, let's say, who are the exploited or oppressed. So so that is how it makes us look at the issues of power in other literatures. So it may not be there directly, but it kind of gives you a pathway as to looking into issues, several other issues, which and one can draw parallels as to how it operates, and it could be different, it could be similar, but at least in a way it helps us to understand how other literatures respond to such issues of dominance, issues of power, and how and whether there is options for resistance, or what is the response of the people, or what kind of a resistance is possible or not. So various issues come about, or we kind of explore further within that. So you see, using such post-colonial perspectives, we can kind of come up with some interesting, let's say, bring up some interesting issues into discussion, interesting revelations. Even while Mridula was talking about indigenous, literature, the aborigines, and one of the issues that which have been coming in, and even in the recent seminar that we had in our university, it struck me was the issue of land. The association of the Aboriginal people, the close relation of the Aboriginal people with their land, and the issues of land that that even you would find in works like that of Mahashita Devi, and the tribals association with, and how the displacement of the tribals from the land. So the land becomes such an important issue, especially when it comes to the indigenous people, be it of Australia or be that of India, and the displacement that occurs, the migrations, the forced migrations that may happen. So you see, so land is, and how, what is the connection with the land? So it opens up, such very interesting conversations. So it kind of helps us, kind of get into an interesting conversation regarding, such issues, as I said, as in the case of that of land, when we read this language. So you see, so we can see that English, and of course, when it comes to Indian literatures in English, or let's say writings in English, there are some still do perceive, I mean, there are, while we have accepted it as one of the, let's say, Indian languages or literature in Indian English literature, still there are, people who still do not really, there are perspectives which kind of, they continue to argue that English remains a colonial language, while especially in the academia, or at least in the English departments, we see it as part of the Indian literary tradition, where we see it as another, branch where you have the English literacy. So English literary writings, or Indian English literature, you could say, have, reshaped English, and the English, of course, we all are aware that it has been reshaped through Indian rhythms, idioms, myths, and multilingual expressions. And I already mentioned about Raja Rao. So the thing is that how do we further, work on that? So one interesting field that another, let's say, discipline that kind of adds to this, let's say, adds or rather redefines or moves towards redefining the comparative literature is that of the translation studies. Because the idea is that comparative literature should, we all know that it should neither privilege, neither it should reject English or literature in English language. Rather, instead, and we've been doing it, and in researchers, we have been encouraging where, we do not restrict ourselves only to using literature that is reading in the English language. We should place it alongside, let's say, Bengali, Tamil, Hindi, Urdu, Marathi, Manipuri, Bodo, Santali, Khasi, and various other languages. So we need to study it, along with, all these literatures, not just in the mainstream or the languages recognized by the, but also various other indigenous languages. So English, in that case, becomes, let's say, one participant in a multilingual conversation, not the center. So the idea is, let's not, or the effort is, or should be, not just, to place it at the center, but to engage it in, because that would be, in a way, reflecting the real world that we live in. Okay? So another aspect that I wanted to add to this was that of the translation studies, because we know without translation, there can be no comparative literature, and it is not simply a linguistic transfer. Translation, literature in translation is a cultural negotiation, and we also have had a very rich tradition of translation in India, where the major epics, they are, for example, Ramayana exists in several languages, Odia, Malayalam, Tamil, and each translation, each version, is, it's both a translation as well as a transcription. So you see that, so literature, it's not something, at least here, it's not something that is fixed, it is something, that keeps, literature gets recreated in a way in the different languages. So it becomes literature that, that travels across different languages and cultures. So modern comparative literature should, or what should be encouraged is translation among the Indian languages, translation from the indigenous languages, and the translation should be reciprocal, because even in the same work, Meenakshi Mukherjee also talks about these translations which have often been in one direction. It's been usually from the vernaculars into the English language mostly, whereas earlier on it was not so. There were readily translations from, let's say, Bangla available in Hindi. So a lot of people, I know that you read Bengali literature through translations in Hindi. But with the coming in of English and with colonialism, we found, and because of globalization and the market, where English becomes the dominant language, we find that text mostly being translated into the English language. But what also needs to be encouraged is the availability of literature in other Indian languages also, rather than translation working in a one-way traffic. Just not just in and it is, I mean, whether we like, but the fact is a lot of literatures that are available to us are mostly in the, let's say, English language available. I think very few texts get translated into the other Indian languages. But we need more translations from Tamil into Assamese, let's say, Marathi into Malayalam, Santali into Kannada, and not just into English. So you see, so translations, in a way, they kind of translation, we can say, democratizes literary circulation. It is available in several languages to several people. Okay, so that needs to be worked out in order to kind of, preserve the linguistic diversity that we have, and the literatures that are available in the various languages. So I think that would be a more enriching and a fruitful, let's say, production. I mean, because we could see how the languages and various literatures or availability of it interacts with the already existing traditions that they have. Of course, apart from translation, as I say, in the major Indian languages, what needs also to be encouraged, and I think Nandini ma'am has been doing it, a focus on folklore studies. A lot of at least in the case of India, we have a lot of oral traditions. So much what we have is that orature, literatures, let's say, or the cultural expressions which are available in oral forms. So even that needs to be translation, because the limitation of colonial literary studies is that the focus usually or has been on written texts, on literature. But if we see it in the context of India, we know that there are so many indigenous communities which preserve literature through songs, through myths, rituals, storytelling, performance, dance. So, so we have these various cultural practices that also encapsulate worldviews and also encapsulates sophisticated worldviews. Okay, as Mridula was talking about, how you have tribal, let's say, worldviews on the environment. If you even look at the Aborigines, how the ways of living are so much in harmony with the environment that they live in. Because having lived so many years within the environment, you still find that the way they have, they preserve the environment around them, despite, being dependent on them. So, what are their worldviews? How do they respond to the environment, and how have they managed to preserve that over all these years without, destroying it? So you see, we should not kind of the way that they should not be seen as having primitive knowledge, or these communities being primitive, but seeing them as their cultures and language as preserving or let's say embodying sophisticated knowledge systems. So comparative literature, I believe, should include Adivasi narratives, let's say Bhil traditions, could be Santhal songs, Naga storytelling, and various oral epics, let's say from Central India. So once you see, when we make space for oral literatures, when we look at, folklores, we examine, what folk culture has to offer, we immediately see that comparative literature starts getting redefined. So it's not just literature, but also how we draw in perspectives from other. It becomes interdisciplinary further if we again see that you see the, boundaries collapsing between, let's say, literature, anthropology, folklore, and history. You see, so the boundaries become porous. So it becomes interdisciplinary as well as kind of includes various kinds of not just written literary forms, but oral traditions, indigenous cultures. So apart from what happens within literatures, of course, the issues, comparative literature, the focus should not just be that of to do with language, or as we all know, it not just with language, but various issues that impact literature in various languages. For example, the issue of partition. We can always look up, major significant historical events and how or what, how they were kind of represented in different languages. What was the response in the different languages, literatures in different languages. Let's say if you look at partition, its response in its response in the Hindi language. Let's say Hindi writers writing in the Hindi language, let's say in Bhishma Sani, or in Urdu as in Manto, or Bapsi Sidhwa writing in English. So, so there are so many. We can look at issues of caste, so various issues, caste, environment, all of this. So we could also, let's say, when it comes to climate, one could study tribal, tribal ecological narratives with the climate fiction of Amitabh Ghosh. So there's so many ways, when we, let's say, when we look at it from the perspective of issues. So, such comparisons bring out, some common concerns. They reveal common concerns, and in that case, the linguistic differences, get erased. We are not so focused on the differences in the language, but the common concerns that may be there in all the various literature. So, what is important, what I would like to finally emphasize is that, as we work towards, reimagining or reframing the, let's say, the Indian comparative literature framework, we of course should begin with the idea that, that all languages, no languages rather, should be accorded a very privileged status. Remember, because all languages embody their own worldviews. It is a language is a carrier of culture, as Rugi emphasized, and all languages are sufficient enough for a community to, to express their, let's say, their worldviews, their principles, their aesthetics, and of course, all languages do get impacted either by the dominance or with interaction with other languages. And there is always this, cross-cultural interactions within languages that. So translation should become also central to literary scholarship. Inclusion of oral tradition should be emphasized. And we need to decolonize the canon. Okay, we must go beyond the colonial and, let's say, metropolitan text. Comparative themes could be explored. Regional dialogues could be encouraged, and tribal epistemologies can be also be made part of the intellectual literary tradition. So we need to also have an interdisciplinary approach. We bring in ideas from, let's say, cultural studies, linguistics, performance studies. All of this could, make this area a very fertile ground, for, let's say, understanding the world around us, producing great literature, and enriching literatures in the process. And I think this is really going to be, going to prove a very enriching exercise, which will, let's say, widen our horizons and make us move towards making the world more inclusive. And of course, let me add digital archives also, because a lot of efforts are being made towards preserving endangered languages through digitization. So the emphasis or the idea that we began with, that considering the fact that we live in a multilingual society, a multilingual culture, this is the way we can work our way into, fostering that multicultural environment into our classrooms, into our academia, into the curriculum that we design. So this is what I would argue for, when I am talking about, let's say, a future of a comparative, future of comparative literature, or how it could be imagined within the Indian classrooms and in the Indian curriculum. So thank you so much for your patient listening, and that is how.
Thank you, ma'am. Actually, there are two questions. One for Mridula ma'am, and that is, yes, which aspect of the oral traditions, this is for, okay, what primary sources and research methods can students use to study the oral traditions of Aboriginal Australians?
They can, for studying these, they can, first hand they can go to, these first hand, they can take first hand information. They can go to these villages where they stay. They can take, they can listen from them, what the songs, the stories, first hand information. Otherwise, translated texts are also available. And because most of the tribals, like the tribals of India, they they wrote in borrowed languages. No, they didn't. Very few. Only Santhali language. It has Santhals have this script called Old Chiki. Otherwise, they write in borrowed languages. So it is not difficult to get these materials and to do research on them. So I think that's what I want to say.
Thank you so much, ma'am. And another question for Sunita ma'am.
Yes.
Which aspects of the oral traditions of Indian tribal communities offer the greatest scope for comparative research?
Well, let me first express my regret that I do not have much first-hand direct knowledge of the tribal communities. But yes, I'm aware of these creation stories, the Marang Buru stories within the Santhal communities. I have not really made an exploration, but these are stories which have been, let's say, they are now available. People have been saying it orally. They have been translated by several people, and those stories are available. Okay, and then because you see, when we talk about tribals, it's not just the Adivasis of the Chota Nagpur areas. There are various other tribes. You have the Northeast, you have the tribes in Tamil Nadu. So you have to see, and of course, you don't have major epics as such like the Ramayana or the Bharata. Yes, you have, mostly you will find creation stories available, which is part of their repertoire, and mostly it's, I think, creation stories that are there. Okay, so not much of, let's say, a very the manner in which you would find the major Indian epics. So that's how it is then, and as I said, they are available in translation. They have been translated, and if you have access to the language, you would even be able to have a better, let's say, understanding of the the nuances of those words. What exactly they mean sometimes, because something is lost in translation. So that is there. So they have such stories, mostly about the origins that you would find. Also, Australian Aborigines, the creation stories are all there. They talk of the concept of dream time. The Australian Aborigines, they have the concept of dream time. That how the the ancestors descended on the earth, and how the formation of the natural formations are basically their ancestors. And and that the concept of land is that, as she said, is no man's land for the outsider, for the let's say, those navigators who came there. But for them, they were the ancestors. So they have this attitude of reverence for the natural formations around. So again, they could not think of buying or selling land. So that is why they, these the colonizers or the navigators, when they came, the colonizers, they laid their claim to the land because they felt that these people had no land, because they did not have papers to support their claims for their land. But the thing is that for them, it was like, it was a mother, it was the land that nourished them. So how could they ever think of selling that land? So they could not have had, papers relating to their land. And it's much later of the Australian government, realized what they had done to the Aborigines, that they kind of, on the basis of several autobiographical narratives, you have the famous one of Sally Morgan's biography, My Place. The whole emphasis is not so much about who she is, but about the place she belongs to. So reclaiming of that, place through the stories about how they have inhabited that land, it is through these stories that they go back. The Australian government acknowledged what had happened or what had been done to them, how they had been displaced, that they decided to later on the basis of these stories which need to be told, or that had to be told, that those lands were given back to the Aboriginal people. You see, so it's very important that these stories need to be told. Okay, so first you make space where you allow them to speak, or not necessarily spoken for, but they should be given space where these stories, so-called marginalized stories, are given space where you listen to the stories, allow for translations, make it available, make it circulate. Only then you would be able to understand the different worldviews and what contribution they make in, let's say, enriching the space, the country, the literatures and cultures of the space. So that's how.
Thank you so much, ma'am. अब मैं आदरणीय माननीय कुलपति एवं हमारी अध्यक्ष महोदया प्रोफेसर नंदिनी साहू मैडम से विनम्र अनुरोध करती हूँ कि वे अपनी मूल्यवान टिप्पणी रखें.
Okay, thank you, Paramita. In fact, this will be a sort of an audacity to comment on such comprehensive research papers and presentations, both the scholars that they have presented today. Somehow I found some connection between both the lectures, though I'm sure that they had not planned it like that. But somehow both the lectures led to translation to Bhasha literatures, to Indian languages, foreign languages, and tribal and folk languages, and indigenous knowledge systems. So both the lectures had similar tone and tenure, though the lectures were exceptionally different from each other. So the first lecture, Professor Mridula Rashmi Kindo, she has definitely used some excellent study material for her research, and she talked about oral traditions and the Aboriginal Australians and the tribes of India. I don't have expertise in Australian literature, though I have one unique course on tribes of India, identity, culture, and lore, which is a part of this MAFCS that I designed. So she talked about the oral traditions as dynamic archives of ecological knowledge systems, cultural memory, community resilience, rather than just folklore. Okay, and she talked about the 700 tribals and Adivasis, their languages in India, compared those with Australian Aboriginal communities, and then a deeper comparative theorization of orality, performance, and indigenous knowledge systems between the Australian and Indian tribal worldviews. That was very, very interesting and important. Professor Mridula, we would rather request you, whenever you are free, give us a list of books that we would like to make a part of our diploma in translation studies, because we want to give a comprehensive list to our students as a part of their diploma in translation, so that they can translate those from English to Hindi and Bangla. We follow 3 languages, so we would like to restrict to only Hindi, English, and Bangla for the time being, until we design other MA courses. Like in due course of time, we will definitely have other Indian languages and our MA courses thereof. But as of now, we stick to Hindi, English, and Bangla. So if possible, you give us a list of books that you think our students should translate, and that will become a part of our archive and also a part of our publications. We would publish the diploma, the projects of the students. And coming to Professor Sunita Murmu, I was so elated when she referred to the net syllabus of folk literature and PGD FCS and MA FCS and all those folklore courses, oral literature courses that we have been working since 2 decades. And she talked about post-colonial literatures within a comparative framework, and her lecture demonstrated that comparative reading unsettles Eurocentric canons by discussing the transnational histories of resistance, memory, and identity. Somewhere Professor Mridula also talked about resistance literature, and her Professor Sunita Murmu's lecture also hinted towards that resistance studies. And then Professor Sunita Murmu recommended a stronger engagement with indigenous Dalit and global South epistemologies, which could further decolonize the comparative framework beyond nation-centric post-colonial paradigms. Decolonizing English departments, literature departments is something that we all have been talking forever, but I really don't get into the politics of decolonizing. What exactly do we mean by decolonizing? Are we planning to do away with whatever we have been studying? Are we planning to introduce brand new subjects which have nothing to do with things that we have been trained with? Probably I don't belong to that school of thought. I would never like to get rid of anything that we have been trained with, like our British literature, American literatures, Australian studies, Canadian studies. They have to be there. So that is how coming 15 days we are going to have an experts committee meeting for MA English in the university, where the primary courses certainly will be literary theories and criticisms, and one course definitely will be British literature, comprehensive British literature course, and one would be American literature, those kind of things. Then the elective courses will be on folk literature, tribal studies, Australian literature, and all those, the way we have done in IGNOU and many other universities. We will plan things like that. That is when I will once again seek help from both of you. And today's lectures, both the lectures have been very, very informative for me personally. And I'm sure our faculty and students have been hugely benefited by your original research. Thanks a lot for contributing to Hindi University.
बहुत आभार मैम.
Thank you so much.
If they have to say something, maybe if they have to comment before you propose a vote of thanks.
Yes, I think no. When I spoke about, because I was trying to speak in the Indian context, this does not mean that we do not talk of literatures from the other, countries, or let's say other literatures available. Let's say continental literature available to us in the English language. Of course, we cannot shut out the world. Definitely not. It should be an engagement even with those literatures. And yes, when it comes to teaching English literature, maybe we sometimes need to think, of what texts we teach within the classroom, because, again, simply following the British literary canon, I mean, for them, it may be relevant, but do we really need to go by the English literary canon, or should we select, certain texts which are relevant to our Indian context? Maybe that would be more beneficial. It is not to leave out, British literature or any other, let's say even French or literatures written in the Spanish language or South American literatures. But what would be of interest to us? What would, how do we relate? Let's say where we could see that we relate to those literatures. So that's, I think, several sometimes events happen which make us go back or revisit those literature. For example, COVID happened. So we all went back to plague and Camus, and trying to how he responded to how did he represent an epidemic in his literature. So now when we are living in a world, let's say a global world, so you cannot, we cannot work in isolation. Our literature is rooted with, the thing is, what idea is, even Tagore's idea was that, of course, you have a concept of a world literature, but you remain rooted in your languages and literatures, of your country. So rooted here, but yes, you're open to knowledge coming from all directions, literature available to us from all directions. I think that's the idea or concept of the literature that even I would think of.
Sure. Okay, Paramita, can you give me 2 more minutes?
Sure.
Okay, I have rather a question for both the senior professors here. That there was a discussion by some eminent scholar on social media recently that why do we start always our English classes with Geoffrey Chaucer? A very eminent scholar wrote, and all of us were commenting on that. So I would like to know the opinion of both of you, that should we necessarily start everything with Chaucer, if yes or if no? And then another question is, in one important university in the country, very, very important university, under which there are 88 colleges, their BA honors first semester, first chapter is Abhigyana Sakuntalam. The students, they just complete their 12th board examination, then somehow they get into English honors. First year, first semester, class 1, chapter 1 is Abhigyana Sakuntalam, and the language is so high profile they hardly understand. So between these two extremes, where should we stand exactly?
No, look, I mean, I have not that begin because you want to trace a tradition, but what we could study is, let's say you study Chaucer, you look at Canterbury Tales, and you look at the other Indian, let's say, narrative forms that we have, which are almost like the Canterbury Tales. Let's say you have those 1001 Nights. The embedded the idea of the embedded stories, the string of stories. We have Katha Sarit Sagar, several stories strung together. So where you have all the pilgrims narrating their different stories. So these formats which were there before even let's say pre-colonial, or I mean like pre-modern, let's say, times. So that format, that narrative structure, so it's like, if you're looking at narrative structures, then of course you talk about Canterbury Tales. But the idea is, the intention with which you are, tracing that tradition. So the thing is, you can always study Canterbury Tales, but how do you place it within the class? So it's not to put a British canon in place that you should, or but the reason why we are studying, it's because we are comparing other such narrative formats available in different cultures. And that makes it interesting. That is when you're bringing different culture, literatures from various regions into a dialogue, into a conversation. Okay, then you have, Amitav Ghosh's novel also, which also talks of, I think, story where, the people are on that ship, and you have various peoples, pilgrims traveling together. So you have pilgrim narratives also. So, so you can bring all of this together and then make an interesting, work around a certain theme. So that's how probably we could study.
Okay. And I would like to know from Professor Mridula.
Yeah, we also have this, we start from Chaucer from the 14th century, and of course it becomes very difficult for students, and then they fail, the kind of students we have. So I think we are following the same conventional from the 14th to then we come towards the nearer century. So I think we should, we have courses like, understanding prose, understanding poetry, understanding drama. You have these, we should begin from there, where you start understanding these genres, and then we have, these simpler texts. And I don't know, we can do with the Chaucer as well these days. I don't know why Chaucer is so important.
Yes, always there. Start with Chaucer.
Yeah, so that is what I want to say.
And then what about Abhigyana? So what about
But-
Abhigyana Sakuntalam in BA first year, first semester?
Yes, that is also as different. You are saying here in IGNOU also, students are facing a lot of problems. But I don't know, when we made the CBCS, prepared the CBCS course, we were following what they had, and they had this uniform course structure, And I think now we are changing it, because it has become difficult for students, especially for the ones who have just come from the class 12.
No, I am planning to keep Abhigyana Sakuntalam in the fourth semester,
Yeah,
not
then
in the first semester.
that means it's good. We can't begin with it.
Yes. Like in beginning, like Professor Mridula said, we will put things like understanding prose, understanding poetry,
Yes.
history of literatures, and all that we have to put.
Understanding drama, something.
Sure. Okay, then thank you so very much. Paramita, please proceed.
Thank you, ma'am. अब कार्यक्रम के समापन की ओर बढ़ते हुए मैं आज के इस महत्वपूर्ण वेबिनार में उपस्थित सभी अतिथियों, वक्ताओं, प्राध्यापकगण, शोधार्थियों एवं प्रतिभागियों के प्रति अपनी हार्दिक कृतज्ञता व्यक्त करती हूँ। सर्वप्रथम मैं हमारी आदरणीय अध्यक्ष महोदया एवं माननीय कुलपति प्रोफेसर नंदिनी साहू जी मैम के प्रति सादर आभार व्यक्त करती हूँ, जिनके संरक्षण, मार्गदर्शन एवं प्रेरणादायी नेतृत्व ने इस आयोजन को विशेष गरिमा प्रदान की। मैं हमारे दोनों विशिष्ट वक्ताओं प्रोफेसर मृदुला रश्मि किंडो मैम एंड डॉक्टर सुनीता मुर्मू मैम के प्रति हार्दिक धन्यवाद ज्ञापित करती हूँ। आप दोनों के विद्वत्तापूर्ण एवं शोधपरक व्याख्यानों ने तुलनात्मक विश्व साहित्य के इस अध्ययन को नई दृष्टि, नए प्रश्न और नए विमर्श प्रदान किए। अब मैं हिंदी विश्वविद्यालय के प्रति भी अपनी हार्दिक कृतज्ञता व्यक्त करती हूँ, जिसके सतत सहयोग और अकादमिक वातावरण में ऐसे सार्थक बौद्धिक आयोजन संभव हो पाते हैं। साथ ही मैं तकनीकी टीम तथा आयोजन से जुड़े सभी सहभागियों का विशेष धन्यवाद करती हूँ, जिनमें मूलतः अमन जी और पाजोरी मैडम जिनके समर्पित सहयोग से ये वेबिनार सफलतापूर्वक संपन्न हुआ है। अंत में मैं सभी प्राध्यापकों, शोधार्थियों, विद्यार्थियों एवं प्रतिभागियों का हृदय से धन्यवाद करती हूँ। आपने अपनी सक्रिय एवं गरिमामयी सहभागिता से इस कार्यक्रम को सफल बनाया। आप सभी का हार्दिक धन्यवाद और नमस्कार।